Alrighty, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is probably going to be a short session. Ian is with me again. Thanks for being here, Ian. And I'm just going to start with questions from last week. I think Jordan was the first question. So Jordan asked, how do you make drum patterns fit with samples? Ian, what do you want to take this first question?
Sure. I'm assuming he's using FL. Do you know?
Yeah, he is.
Okay. Well, in FL Studio, there's a option to actually click on your audio and it will bring up a tempo. Hold on, let me pull up FL so I actually see what I'm talking about here.
You're good. Take your time.
There's an option in the top left corner of your WAV file inside of your playlist. And inside of there, you'll have an option to adjust to recognize the tempo with FL Studio, and you'll have different ranges. You should be able to take a pretty good guess on what range your tempo is in, but if not, there's an auto detect function as well. They'll tap out the tempo for you and adjust everything into whatever tempo you set in your project. So it's pretty easy. I honestly don't do a lot of audio manipulation in FL Studio. I just recently picked up Ableton specifically for audio manipulation and live performance features, but I know FL just got another plugin called New Time, which just got another improvement on it, but I haven't messed around with the latest update to it yet. So I'm not sure if they fixed the main issue, which was if the loop was longer than, I believe, 4 bars or 8 bars, the algorithm wasn't picking up the transients properly. So it was almost impossible to loop anything that was extra length. So the workaround with that, if you do have New Time, I think New Time comes with all of the editions of FL. I could be wrong, but he should have it.
No, I think you're right. It should come with all versions, and I think it came out with which version? 20.7?
Yes.
Or was it 20.6?
What version are we on right now?
We're on
7?
Yeah, we're on 20.7, but it's like 20.7.
It came out in the last one, so 0.6.
Okay. Well, either way, that doesn't really matter. As long as you're updated, then you'll have access to that plugin.
Exactly.
So yeah, I definitely I definitely mess with that plugin. I do a lot of audio manipulation directly in the playlist as well. That's another option for you. So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Ian. Were you done?
Oh, no. I was gonna say the workaround, if you're still getting that glitch, is to just chop up your loop or your sample into 4-bar segments instead of however long that it is for you.
Okay.
Sorry if you guys just heard that. I just dragged a sample into FL.
No, I didn't hear anything.
Okay, cool. Let me double check this. Yeah, so if you left click the top left corner of your sample inside of the playlist, you'll have an option that says sample on the right side of the drop down window that pops up, and you'll have time warp sample, detect tempo, and fit to tempo. So fit to tempo, if you already have your track decided in terms of what tempo you want to just click fit to tempo, and then detect tempo is what I was talking about earlier, where if you kind of have in mind the different ranges that your sample is in, you would just click one of those options and then it would kind of snap that for you. Another thing to keep in mind, make sure that you have stretch turned on inside of your playlist. And to do that, you got to look at the top left corner of the actual playlist window where you see the grid, and you'll see 0 point crossing, and next to that it's the stretch option. So definitely make sure that your stretch option is turned on. Otherwise, nothing's gonna you're gonna get like weird artifacts with your audio. It's not gonna stay with the same pitch or anything. But if you want to change your pitch and have weird audio stretching effects, then go with one of the regular resampling algorithms, and it will do that for you.
Sweet. Appreciate that. Let's move on to Polysinus Music's question. So he's asking, how can I add more groove to his drop bass and make the drop sound more powerful and exciting? So I'll answer this question and then we'll move on to the second half of his question. So I mean, as far as adding more groove to the bass specifically, you just need to move things slightly off time. There's actually a groove. What is the name of that feature? Is it a groove feature, or is it, what's that thing called? The knob that you could on the channel rack that you can slide?
Oh, swing.
Swing, yeah. So there is a swing feature, so you could try messing with that. You could also try bringing things slightly off the grid. I don't know that, like me personally, I like my bass to be really locked in, and then I like my drums to be a little bit more off to add groove. So that would be my suggestion, to like all your synths and all your instruments and your bass and everything, have that be really locked in, but then use your drums to create more swing and more groove. As far as making the drop more powerful and exciting, so contrast between like just volume is a big one. A lot of beginners kind of overlook this. It's really simplistic like concept, but you basically make the rest of your track quieter, and then when the drop hits, you turn it up. So you can use like a fruity balance or something to do that, or just work it inside your arrangement to just make your synths and like everything louder in your drop section. One way to kind of add more contrast in the build up section, make sure that you're taking out the bass, the sub bass, or you could filter it out if you have it sort of in the beginning of it. I would recommend probably just like taking out, like not really having any sub bass in that build up section, and then maybe doing some even more filtering where you're filtering out some of the other low end or high end. So any sounds that have energy, kind of filter them out, and you can even make them a little bit quieter right before the drop. And so then when the drop hits, the drop has way more energy. It sounds more powerful because of that. Other things you can do are, saturation. Saturation adds harmonics. It's kind of like a subtle form of distortion. So, adding saturation on synths, stuff like that. OTT kind of has that effect. It's a multi-band compressor, but it adds a lot of high end and excitement in the sound. So, yeah, those tips will definitely help you out. Ian, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, sure. The filtering effect that you're talking about, filtering out the low end. So if you're using like a high pass filter, maybe automating that. But another thing that you might want to automate or use as sort of an effect right before your drop is like a washout effect. So maybe like reverb or delays that kind of get really spread out, which is another thing that you want to do if you kind of want to make the drop feel like it explodes. You can kind of narrow in your stereo field. So maybe you don't want really washed out or really spread out, washed out reverb. Maybe you want that more mono. And then when the drop actually comes, use a stereo widener to either widen it back to where it was or make it wider than the original track. But just a couple things that you want to pay attention to is a correlation meter, and make sure you're not going too wide so that when it's playing in a club or on a phone, you're not losing stereo information when it collapses down to mono. So keep that in mind when you're using that trick.
Yeah, and Span has a correlation meter built into it. So get Span if you don't have it. It's by Voxengo. It's a free plugin, and that'll take care of all your metering needs. All right, cool. Let's go ahead and answer, I guess, the second part of this question. So what do you think can be done to the sub bass section of a bass layer? Like, should it play the same notes as the high bass or more flat notes? I think what he means by flat notes is the same note all the time. I'm assuming like the root note of the scale and then just playing that same note the whole time. Referring to Kashmir's tutorial on basses, which he has on his website, he said that the sub should stay more linear to keep its sub functionality intact, and that it is advisable not to scale too many notes with it. So this is really going to depend on the genre of music.
Exactly.
100%. Like dubstep, for example, I mean, yeah, like dubstep, you want pretty much the sub bass to be playing the same note unless it's obviously moving around. I mean, yeah, this is, I don't know. This is one of those weird questions that it just completely depends on the
Because
track.
even within the genre,
Yeah.
it can change up.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so
because you could have more staccato stuff. Because what Kashmir is referring to is probably more sustained bass line. So you would have that sustained sub going with the bottom note of your chord, for example. But I can imagine a Kashmir song also having one of those jump basses where it's just more staccato, where it's just hitting maybe 4 times within a bar. And in that situation, he's probably using that sub more as a bounce effect. So the sub's moving along with whatever the upper notes of the bass are doing, or the upper frequencies are doing. So it's probably not just sitting on the bottom chord. But even if Kashmir is not doing that, I would say explore both, because I definitely wouldn't say that Kashmir is 100% right. This is what you do all the time. He makes a certain type of track, so you might actually enjoy doing both. So explore both for sure.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I'm going to skip over this next question about Helm, and just if anybody is watching this that does have questions in the future, if you have any sort of like support type questions, I'm probably not going to be able, I don't think either Ian or I are going to be able to answer that. I would contact the support of whatever, synth, or if it's like a problem with FL Studio, maybe we'll know. But for the most part, support type questions, we're probably not going to know. So it might be better to just reach out to support of that company.
Can I chime in on that?
What'd you say?
Yeah, it seemed like you had some knowledge on that. Yeah,
well, I'm just going to reiterate what David was just saying, because I recently just had to do all this. FL support in their if you do a support ticket through FL Studio, it will get answered very, very quickly. They will try and help you the best that they can. Also, Serum. I had an issue with Serum, and the main guy emailed me back within an hour. So
yeah, Steve Dude is awesome.
So,
yeah.
I mean, these places will definitely help you out. Get with the programming that you're in, get with their support, and they'll probably fix it out. Now, Helm, I don't even know if it's being supported anymore, so that may be an issue.
I would think that it is, because I just heard that the developer is coming out with a new synth like soon. So
that's exciting.
And I forget the name of the synth. I'll have to look into that. But yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on, because from what I heard, it sounded like it was going to be pretty dope. So, but yeah, let's move on. So yeah, definitely 100% there. Yeah.
I want to emphasize what Fat Hedonist just said, because I really appreciate that. I just got through saying that exact thing in my Discord, actually, because someone was asking a support ticket type question, and I said my response was, that's definitely not a question for this place. Just hop in the forum. It'll get answered today, I promise you.
Yeah.
And sure enough, exactly what Fat Hedonist said. Make a support ticket or hop into the forum. It'll get answered today, I promise you.
Yeah, ImageLine's really good about support stuff. All right, cool. So K4L says how to make sounds in Serum that you hear. I mean, like reverse engineer a sound. Like, I know attack, decay, sustain, release and stuff, but if you listen to Kygo's tracks, his signature pluck is a square wave, but after that, it's like mindlessly tweaking the envelope to get the tone right, and the effects are confusing as hell. I mean, there should be a better way of doing this. So it's all about knowledge. It's all about understanding the basics and the fundamentals of sound design. And then it's also about training your ear and listening. I've gotten to a point now, like, I mean, I'm not like a master sound designer or anything, but I have a really good ear, and I've been doing this long enough that if I hear an effect or if I hear a sound, I can kind of reverse engineer it in my head, so that I know what I'm going to be trying to do in order to make that same sound. So for example, I know if a sound has reverb or delay or a bit crushing effect or chorus or, whatever, like any of those effects, you're going to need to learn what those effects do, what they sound like, how they interact with sound, in order to be able to do this and understand this so that you're not just sitting there tweaking. I mean, sound design in a way like is a lot of just tweaking and messing around with knobs and seeing what happens. But as far as reverse engineering stuff, you're going to need to know what all the different effects do, how they sound, and what they actually sound like inside a mix so that you can hear it, what it sounds like. You can pick apart that individual sound within the mix and be able to tell what's on it in the way of effects and stuff. Ian, did you have anything you wanted to add on to that?
No, that is absolutely perfect. Well, I guess one thing that to add is to just start making your own sounds, because when you instead of trying to reverse engineer what someone else is doing, there's so many different ways to achieve the same exact sound, especially within Serum. You're going to come across techniques on accident by making your own sounds that's going to give you ideas about how someone else made a sound of their own. So definitely jump into creating your own plucks, your own basses, your own leads, and so on and so forth. And you'll get more ideas in terms of understanding, okay, well, this is the order, not just what effects they use, but what order they use those effects in, because that's really important too, because delay sounds different going into reverb versus reverb going into delay, and saturation sounds different with a transient shaper before or after, so on and so forth. EQ, compression, the order that you do certain things will definitely achieve a very different sound. And also, this just popped in my head. Back in the day when I got started with simple sound design, I didn't own Silent, but I watched a lot of Silent tutorials. And that's one of those basic synths where you can really figure out all the different ins and outs of modulation and really modulation. And that plays a really big role in what your sound is going to sound like. So definitely jump into the modulation page. I know that's like the scariest page for everyone, but really when you want those more complex sounds, you got to go way beyond just ADSR and effects. You got to start modulating those effects with those envelopes and LFOs so that you can get more variety within the sound that you already created. And don't be afraid to take those knobs to their very extreme. And that's one of the things that I learned with Silent. Even the highest setting, one notch just below the highest setting, has a very different sound than full blast or 98 or 97. So especially when it comes to things like distortions, phasers, choruses, stuff like that. So make sure you're really cycling through those knobs to their extremes and below to get really familiar with what it's fully capable of. So don't be scared when you start tweaking. I think tweaking tends to be the word that a lot of people use. So people go in and literally just tweak knobs. They just literally turn them just ever so slightly. Go nuts with those knobs so that you really get familiar with what extreme reverb sounds like, or just a touch of reverb sounds like. And that will give you a lot more ideas on what other people are doing with their sounds.
Yeah, definitely. And let me just add one more thing to this. If you do have the money, I know that my channel, I don't really go into a lot of paid plugins because I want to, show the power of stock plugins and what you can do with them. But one thing that makes Serum so amazing is that it is really good for people who are trying to learn sound design because of the way the user interface looks, and you can see, like, you actually have a visual of everything that's happening inside of that synth while you're doing it. And the way that you map things is just like, everything is just very user friendly and intuitive. So if you have the money to get Serum, I definitely recommend getting Serum as a synth to kind of learn sound design with. So, but we'll move on. Well, actually, he had a little bit more. Yeah. So
you
also
get $10 or blah. You can rent it for $10 a month on Splice as well. So if you're not trying to dish out the full 180 right off the bat, you could spend $200 over a 20-month period, and you'll get the synth.
Yeah, it's a rent to own, so you'll own it when you're done paying it off. Yeah, that's actually what I did. So there was kind of a second part to this question. Also, is it all right to put a limiter on your drums as it lowers their volume while preserving the same impact and transients? So I mean, yeah, it's all right to put a limiter on your drums. Like, so this is sort of, I think that limiting is kind of a misunderstood subject.
For sure.
Because limiting, okay, so basically what limiting is it's compression, but it's like compression at a very high ratio. So it's like massive amounts of compression. There might be some cases where limiting could be applied to your drums. I think that I would recommend doing compression, especially first. If you're talking about, a drum bus or something like that, and you want to just subtly glue everything together, I would reach for a compressor before I would use a limiter on the drums. Yeah, Ian, do you have anything you want to add on to that or say?
Yeah, if you are gonna throw a limiter on your drums, just try to go as transparent as possible. I'd say that. So I know L2 is really good for that. Not the Waves L2, but the Pro L2 from Fab.
Oh yeah,
Fab filters. Yeah, that thing's like as transparent as they come. So I know if you're really trying to get a loud track, like if you're in EDM and you're trying to blast this thing, then yeah, you probably are gonna want to go the route of using a limiter on your drums. But just keep in mind, mess with those attack settings, the attack and release, so that you're not totally destroying your transients. But that's what Skrillex does on his drum bus. He'll add a Pro L2, some EQ, and then he'll do that to his. He has a drop bus as well, and a synth bus, and all of those each have their own limiter.
Yep.
So, and then all of that goes into
another limiter at the end.
Yeah, another limiter at the end.
Yeah,
the only thing that he doesn't have going through its own bus limiter are the vocals, and that makes sense, right? You want your vocals to really stand out, be upfront, and still have the dynamics of a vocal. So all these other things that are getting really limited and squashed down, it just lets that vocal really, really stand out. So that's how he's able to get these super ridiculously -3 LUFS loud mixes and still have a vocal that sounds like it's on a normal track.
Yeah, that is the key. Limiting is definitely one of the keys to getting a really loud mix, if you do it like that. So, anything else you wanted to add, Ian? Or were you done?
No.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's move on to another Polysinus music question. Trying to make a deep house song right now, but my chords feel too bright and happy. Whereas when you drop that same melody into the bass, it sounds like your usual deep house chord progression. Is there any method to make the chords and top melody less bright and give them that more club type of vibe? I would say, the first thing that comes to mind is use a different sound. What do you think, Ian?
I'm more curious what chords he's using. Every scale that you have, I'm not a deep house guy, but I can hear deep house in my head right now.
Yeah, I'm not either, but yeah, I'm in the same boat.
All of the chords that you would use within your scale, you have 3 minor chords to choose from. So try and stick with those minor chords. It sounds like you're probably playing way too many major chords. A way to get around that, if you're feeling like your chord progressions are getting stuck and you feel like you have to go to a different chord, but the only chords that you have left are maybe a major chord or something that does sound too bright. One of the tricks that I like to do, especially I'm a trap producer mainly, one of the tricks that I like to do in trap, because trap utilizes a lot of minor scales and minor chord progressions, I'll use inversions as part of the progression. So I think that's something that a lot of people sleep on. One thing that you can do, if you're in E minor, for example, so your first chord is E minor, you can use the normal, 3-note triad E minor, where you would have E, G, and B. Yeah, E, G, B. I think that's E minor. So you would have that normally in that order. But within your chord progression, you could switch that up to an inversion of that, where you start with B instead of E, or you start with G instead of E with that chord, and it will sound totally different, or not totally different. It'll sound, it'll keep your, it'll keep the quality of the melody intact, if that makes sense. Your chords will really predict what vibe your melodies are going to play, because you could have the same melody repeating over and over and over again, but if you change the chord progression, it makes the melody sound totally different. If you use inversions instead of going from a minor chord to a major chord, go back to the same minor chord and just invert it, and you'll be surprised how much movement that gives your chord progression, to the point where it makes you feel like, okay, I did choose another chord. It does sound different, and it adds more energy to the track. Another thing that you could do, instead of just going straight to the inversion, think of the inversion as an additional chord. So going from E minor, instead of going straight to the E minor inversion, go to a different minor chord. Like I said, you have 3 minor chords to choose from, and then go back to the E minor inversion. So there's a lot of different tricks there that you can do. All of a sudden, you just multiplied the amount of minor chords that you have by 2, because there's 2 inversions for each basic triad. So if you combine the inversions and your regular minor chords, maybe you still want 1 major chord in there, because that's something that a lot of people sleep on too. Going from minor to major back to minor, that causes that sensation of darkness or clubbiness or lushness or ambience, dissonance. You kind of need that contrast every once in a while, depending on your track, to kind of give that vibe overall. Because if you just stick with just minor chords, you might get a little too dark, and it might sound like a totally different genre. Because I'm pretty sure Deep House still has major chords involved in it, but it sounds like you're probably just playing too many major chords within your chord progression. So I would say stick to more minors and look at the inversions of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the obvious answer. Is definitely, yeah. Thanks for that, Ian. I should have answered with that as well. And just make sure that, just to add on to this and kind of take it a step back even more. So if you don't have chords, if you're just playing like a bass line and a melody, make sure that the melody is in a minor key as opposed to a major key. So yeah, just minor in general is going to be darker. Major is going to sound happy. So let's see. So he's got another question. Okay, so how to make beat drop fills from scratch uniquely for one's track. Are we going to be able to answer this without doing like a full-on tutorial for this one, or what do you think, Ian?
If I could answer it in 1 second or one sentence, I would say open up FPC if you're an FL Studio user, and load up a bunch of drum hits that you want to use as fills. So, kick drums, toms, heavy snares, percussive elements, and then go into your piano roll of the FPC, and then turn on your arpeggiator. What you can do is just make a straight line, paint. You click the paint tool and just paint a straight line like you're making hi-hats, and then just delete the section where you don't want the fill, where you don't want the roll. So you probably just want that fill at the very end. So you might have maybe 8 drum hits, all on C. Let's just say we just make 8 little hits all on C on the 4th bar. And then you would hit Control A or Alt A, I forget which it is. That brings up the arpeggiator, and it'll just hit random notes for you, and it'll make that fill. And then you just delete whatever sound you don't want or whatever hit you don't want, and then go back into FPC and then rotate the sounds out from there if you want to switch out one of the samples.
It's actually a great idea. I've never tried that before, but that's genius. I need to try that for sure.
I saw someone do that, and what they added this other trick onto it. They loaded up Edison, turned on loop inside of Edison and just recorded for hours. And he had every fill,
And
a
just
whole pack of fill.
yeah,
It just,
seriously, dude, that's
yeah,
crazy. Well, we don't even need to sound design our own fills anymore. We can just
right.
auto generate them. That's actually, yeah, that's really cool. I need to try that. All right, cool. So let's move on. Tact. I was cooking something and I have these two sounds that I want to use, but both of them share the same frequencies. They're pretty much overlapping and not standing out in the mix. So in general, what should we do about two sounds that are overlapping frequencies?
Definitely point out Poissinus's answer there, because that was my first thought.
Panning.
Yeah, just get those panned out of the way, especially if they're, it sounds like they're probably doing the same thing, playing the same type of melody or something. So yeah, just pan those left and right so that you have a nice stereo. Like that's an advantage when you have that problem, because now you have a balance that you can add to the left and right side that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a good one. I'm trying to think. So there are multiple ways to approach this. Panning is definitely one. One thing that this is sort of, in my experience, if I have, I never really have this issue, because one thing that I think of and that I just sort of like, I don't know, it's hard to explain, but the way that I think
I know what you're about to say.
well, the way that I think about music is, okay, so leveling the volume is like the biggest thing that you can do.
Yep.
So if you level the volume properly, even before you start doing panning or anything else, then you're like 90% of the 90% of the way there with your mix anyway. So you can just, whichever one you want to sort of stick out more, if you just turn the other one down until they're balanced, that's another way you could do it. And then I would here's another hack to go even deeper than the panning thing. So what I would do is I would have the main layer that I wanted to stick out like the most, like as your main frequency. That would be the sort of mono or centered one. And then the other layer, I would put some sort of stereo effect on it. So I'd put like the fruity stereo shaper, make it really wide. And that way you have, and then you could mess with the EQ too if you needed to just kind of make them fit together even more. But that sort of hack, or whatever you want to call it, is going to make your mixes, like, it's just going to make it sound way bigger, way wider, and it's a really full. Yeah, it's a really good way to do things. So
yeah, I liked what you said about oh crap, I just lost it. But you said something about oh yeah, the EQing. Notice how we're not talking about EQ except for after all this. So it's just a really good idea to get your levels right and get your any balancing right. And another trick that you can do is putting it into mono, and that will definitely help you hear which sound you need to bring up or bring down to make it stand out. That way you'll actually hear how those sounds are going to combine with each other. And when you're listening to it in mono, I think, okay, here's the thing. I think a lot of people are just really scared of phase cancellation, and it's not a bad thing. Like, phase cancellation happens. That's actually what EQ is. EQ is just phase cancellation.
Yeah, and just to add on to this, sorry to interrupt you, man, but I feel the same way. People freak out about phase, like about things being like an anti-phase or whatever. People freak out about phase, and it's really not. I mean, you can use, like, phase is sound design. Yeah, it's part of sound design, and I mean, that's how you create crazy sounds, is by doing crazy things with phase. So continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I totally agree with you.
When two sounds share the same frequencies, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to mute out. It's going to create a sound. It's going to create something, and that something might be something that you want to keep. So just because you're using your eyes and you see that, oh man, these both share 1000 1K, it doesn't matter. That's okay. Just pick the sound that you want to stand out more, level that up, and level the other one down, or vice versa. And then like another monster was pointing out, really EQ should be your last line of attack. After you level everything, go into painting, listen in mono, you should need very, very little EQ. Really, in terms of balance, fixing those two sounds to make them sound good together. When you're using stereo imaging, panning, leveling, that should get you almost all the way there, if not all the way there. And that way you're not doing these crazy weird EQ moves where you're ducking one frequency in one sound and boosting another frequency in another sound. That works sometimes, but more often than not, just because they're sharing a frequency, I find that it actually is okay, especially when we're talking about frequencies outside of bass. When we're talking about those mids, high mids and highs, those frequencies are going to cross no matter what. So you got to really pay more attention to whether or not you like it or not whether or not they are crossing.
Yeah, 100%. So my Nod just joined. What's up, man? Did you have any questions about anything? Or are you just coming to hang out?
I'm just
Cool, man.
I wasn't able to hear that. Do you say just hanging out?
Yeah, I'm just hanging out.
Oh, okay, that's what's up. All right, well, we're actually wrapping up. I think that was the last question. So, Ian, unless you had anything to add, I think that's pretty much it.
Nope. Good to go.
Cool. Those are some good questions. So this actually turned out to be a good session. I wish more people could have been involved, but we got it recorded. I'll be posting it in the answers tab, and we'll be doing it again next week at 1 p.m. So
For sure.
try and get some more people in here. All right. See you guys.
All right, y'all. Take care.
See ya.